The woman at the turnstile had done nothing but arrive without her badge, and the security guard blocking her path already had a hand on his radio. "Ma'am, no badge, no entry. I don't know who let you through those doors, but you can't be back here. Step back to the lobby." She'd come in early, before the floors filled up, in a hoodie and sneakers, to walk the new space they were building out on 12. A black woman with no visible badge, heading for the executive elevators. To Kurt Bishop, the campus security guard, that could only mean one thing: someone who tailgated in behind a real employee and didn't belong. He was wrong. He was about to be more wrong than he'd been in his life, because the woman he was detaining hadn't slipped past anyone. She founded the company. Her name was on the wall behind him, lit up over the reception desk. It was on the building outside. It was the name on the front of the whole place, and it was hers. Before we find out who the woman they detained really was, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. Please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let's dive back into the story. Her name was Dr. Nia Coleman, and she was 44 years old, and the name lit up in brushed steel over the reception desk behind Kurt Bishop's shoulder was hers. Nia had built the company out of almost nothing, and she had built it in large part out of being underestimated. She had been a kid who taught herself to code on a battered library computer, budgeting her allotted hour a day like a miser, because it was the only machine she had access to. She would go straight from school to the public library and sign the clipboard for a terminal, and she learned to type fast and think faster, because the clock was always running and there was always someone waiting behind her for the machine. She taught herself from books she couldn't afford to buy, and so read standing up in the stacks, and she wrote code on paper at home, at the kitchen table, running it in her head line by line because she had no computer of her own to run it on, and then racing to the library the next day to type it in and find out where she'd been wrong. Years later, when she could have bought 100 of any machine she wanted, she still remembered the exact weight of that hour, the miserly, desperate preciousness of access, and it was the reason, more than any market analysis, that she had built a company obsessed with the idea of the door. She knew in her body what it cost to be on the wrong side of one. She had spent her whole childhood there, an hour a day, waiting her turn for a computer other kids had 3 of at home. She had been a teenager who fixed neighbors' laptops for pocket money, a scholarship student in a computer science program where she was the only black woman in most of her classes, a graduate student with an idea 3 separate investors told her, politely, wouldn't work, usually while addressing their questions to the young white man on her team, assuming he must be the founder and she the assistant who'd come along to take notes. She could still replay the worst of those meetings frame by frame. A prominent investor in a glass conference room who had spent 40 minutes directing every technical question about Nia's own architecture she had written line by line, to the junior engineer beside her, a decent kid 2 years out of school who kept trying, with visible discomfort, to redirect him. She built this. She is the one to ask. The investor had not been able to hear it. Some picture in his head would not let the words land. Nia had answered 3 of the hardest questions herself, precisely and without heat, and watched the man's face do the small, involuntary scramble of someone whose certainty has just cracked. And he had passed on the deal anyway, for reasons never quite stated, in language about founder fit that could not be argued with because it never actually said anything. She found her funding elsewhere, the way she always found a way. That investor's firm later begged twice to buy into a subsequent round and was told, politely, that the round was full. She never gloated. She simply remembered, the way she remembered everything, and moved on and built the door she had been shut out of into the very center of the company she made. She had corrected them, each time, calmly. She had built the thing anyway. And the idea that wouldn't work had gone from a cramped apartment to a garage to a real office to, at last, the gleaming glass and concrete campus she was standing in that morning, with her name in steel letters on the front of it and a few thousand employees inside. She had a conviction she repeated in every company all hands, a line her longtime staff could recite, that talent is distributed evenly across the world and opportunity is not, and that the entire point of what they were building was to widen the door she had had to force open with her own shoulder. She meant it. She hired against the pattern on purpose. She put people who had been overlooked their whole careers into the rooms where decisions got made, because she remembered in her body exactly what it was to be the smartest person in a room and the last one anyone looked at. It was the actual product beneath the software, a company where the person who didn't look the part got the benefit of the doubt instead of a second glance, which was precisely why the thing that was about to happen at her own turnstile would land on her when it landed, as a personal failure, even as it happened to her. Nia came in early most mornings before the campus filled up, because the quiet was when she thought best. There was a version of a founder who arrived at 10 with an entourage and a car. Nia was not that version. She still drove herself. She still parked in the general lot. She still, by deep reflex, got to the building before almost anyone, when the light was coming up gray over the glass and the corridors were empty and she could hear herself think. It was the hour she did her real work, not the meetings, not the decks, but the actual thinking, the pacing of an empty floor with a problem turning over in her head. And that particular morning, she'd wanted to walk the 12th floor, the new space that was being built out for a team she was expanding, and see it empty and unfinished before the construction crews and the staff arrived, because she'd like to stand in a space and feel what it wanted to become before anyone told her what it was. She'd thrown on a gray zip hoodie and sneakers, the same thing half her engineers wore, the founder's uniform in an industry that had made a virtue of not dressing up, and driven in before dawn. And in the rush, distracted by the problem she was chewing on, she had left her badge sitting on the kitchen counter at home. She hadn't thought twice about it. She had walked into her own building 1,000 times. She assumed reasonably that if it came up, she would simply have someone wave her through. The way it had always gone on the rare mornings she'd forgotten it before. And it is worth pausing here, before it went wrong, on the fact that it did not have to. Because a younger guard on the early shift, a trainee named Malik, had actually recognized her the moment she came through the doors, and had started to lift a hand in greeting, a nervous good morning half forming on his face, because he knew exactly whose building this was. It should have ended there. A junior man treating the founder like the founder, or, failing that, simply treating a woman without a badge like a human being to be helped, rather than a threat to be stopped. But Kurt Bishop was the senior guard on that shift, and Kurt saw the same woman Malik saw, and reached the opposite conclusion before she had crossed half the lobby. Kurt Bishop was 39, and he had worked campus security for 4 years, and he had developed the specific pride of a man who guards valuable things and mistakes proximity to them for importance. Kurt had a picture in his head of who worked at a place like this, who the executives were, who the engineers were, who belonged past the turnstiles into the secure floors. He would have told you the picture was built from experience, and there was a grain of truth in that, which is exactly what let him never examine the rest of it. The picture had a shape to it, and a color, and it did not readily include a black woman in a hoodie walking toward the executive elevators before the building was properly open. When he saw exactly that, his whole system lit up. Not an employee, not one he recognized, and Kurt prided himself on knowing faces. Not an executive, obviously. The thought didn't even form. Someone who had tailgated in behind a badge holder and was headed somewhere she shouldn't be. Kurt had caught tailgaters before. It was the part of the job that made him feel like more than a man at a desk, and he had been thanked for a few of the catches, and the thanks kept the instinct holy. He would have been offended to be called what he was being. He didn't think of it as prejudice. He thought of it as vigilance, as security, as doing the job well. But the instinct that decided, on sight and on nothing else, that the woman in the hoodie could not be anyone who mattered was not vigilance. It was the oldest assumption there is behind a security desk. There had been an engineer the year before, a young black woman on the data team, whom Kurt had stopped and questioned 3 separate times in a single month, badge or no badge, until she had started using a side entrance to avoid him and had eventually left the company for reasons her exit interview listed only as culture. Kurt had never connected her departure to himself. He had logged each stop as vigilance and moved on. That is how the quiet kind of prejudice survives in a man who would pass any test you gave him. Not as hatred he would recognize in a mirror, but as a sincere certainty that he is protecting something, and a careful refusal ever to count the people his certainty drives away. So Kurt came around his desk, planted himself in front of the turnstile, put his hand near the radio on his belt, and moved to detain the founder of the entire company, certain, all the way down, that he was doing his job. "Morning," Nia said, easy, slowing at the turnstile. "I left my badge at home. I know. Give me 1 second and I'll get someone to wave me through." "That's not how it works." Kurt didn't move out of her path. No badge, no entry, no exceptions. "And honestly, I didn't see you badge in at the front doors either. So I need to know how you got into this building in the first place." "I walked in the front doors, like I do every morning." Nia kept her voice light, though something in her had already gone alert, because she had heard, "How did you get in here?" in that exact register many times in her life. "I can prove who I am in about 30 seconds. Let me pull up my credentials on my phone, or you can call up to my floor, or, honestly, the fastest thing is to look me up in your own directory. May I show you my phone?" "I don't need your phone. I need you to step back toward the lobby and wait." Kurt's hands settled fully onto the radio. "We've had people tailgate in to get at the equipment, and you're walking straight for the executive floors with no badge and no explanation I can verify. So, you can wait right there while I sort this out. Or I can call the police and let them sort it out. Your choice." And to prove he meant it, Kurt actually lifted the radio and then his own phone and made a show of pulling up the non-emergency line, narrating it a little for the lobby. "Unauthorized person refusing to leave a secure facility." The way a man does a thing he is certain will end an argument by itself. It was, Nia thought, genuinely remarkable, in the clinical way she noticed everything, that a man would sooner summon armed officers into his own company's lobby than spend 30 seconds typing a name into the directory on the tablet at his own desk. The choice told her more about how the building actually ran than any report ever had. He had 4 fast, bloodless ways to learn the truth within arm's reach, and he reached past every one of them for the police because the police did not require him to consider that he might be wrong, and being wrong about the woman in front of him was the one outcome Kurt Bishop could not tolerate. There it was, the threat delivered with the easy confidence of a man who had never once been on the wrong end of it. A couple of early employees had slowed near the turnstiles, watching. Nia noted the whole shape of it, the way she noted everything. And she did not raise her voice, because she understood exactly how a raised voice from a black woman being detained in a corporate lobby would be read, and by whom. And I want to name what she was feeling behind that calm, because from the outside it read as nothing. A composed woman declining to be rattled, and inside it was old and very heavy. Standing at the turnstile of the company she had built with her own hands, being told by a stranger that the likeliest explanation for her was theft, Nia was every earlier version of herself at once. The scholarship kid assumed to be lost on the first day of class, the founder mistaken for the note-taker, the engineer whose ideas landed in silence until a man repeated them. That is the part people who have never felt it do not understand. It is never only the insult in front of you. Each one reaches back and touches every other one, and for a moment you are every age you have ever been, while someone decided you were less than you are. Nia felt all of it, and kept her hands loose and visible, and her voice level, because she had learned across a lifetime that her composure was the one thing men like Kurt could never take from her, and she was not going to hand it to him now, in her own lobby, on her own morning. "You keep saying you can't verify it," Nia said evenly. "I am handing you 3 separate ways to verify it. My phone, a call upstairs, your own employee directory, and you're refusing all 3 in favor of the one option that ends with police. I'd like you to notice that you're doing that. because it means this was never actually about verification. It's about you not having a badge. It's about what you decided the second I walked through the door, Nia said quietly, before you knew anything about the badge at all. Kurt did not look her up. Looking her up would have taken 30 seconds, and it would have ended his career far more gently than what was actually coming. Let me stop here and tell you what Kurt Bishop did not know, because it turns this from an ugly misunderstanding into something far larger. The woman he was detaining was the founder and chief executive of the entire company, the person whose name was on the incorporation papers, whose signature was at the bottom of the contract that put Kurt at that desk. Her name was mounted in lit, brushed steel letters on the wall directly behind him, over the reception desk, where he sat beneath it every single shift. It was etched into the glass on the building's face outside, the name he walked past under every morning on his way in. And on the lobby's big welcome screen, on a slow rotation with the company's mission statement and its quarterly numbers, was a photograph of the founder herself, the same face now standing at his turnstile in a hoodie, being told to step back to the lobby. At that very moment, upstairs, her chief of staff was checking her watch and wondering why the CEO, who had texted that she was coming in early, hadn't yet appeared on 12. Every proof was in the room. One of them was in lit steel letters directly over his own head. One was glowing on a screen 15 feet away, and Kurt was reaching for his radio to call the police. Now, here is the part worth sitting with, because Nia made a choice, and she made it deliberately. She had her phone in her hand. She could have pulled up her credentials, or simply said the 4 words, "I'm the CEO," and watched Kurt Bishop's face come apart. Part of her, the part that was 44 years tired of proving she belonged in rooms she had every right to stand in, wanted to. But Nia had spent her whole life learning something most people never get the chance to learn. Pulling rank teaches the Kurts of the world nothing at all. If she flashed the title now and watched him crumble, he would learn exactly one lesson, that he'd had the bad luck to stop the wrong black woman this time. He'd apologize the way people apologize for getting caught. And the instinct that had come around that desk would go home and sleep soundly and come around the desk just as fast the next morning, aimed at the next person who didn't fit his picture and couldn't summon an executive to vouch for them. Nia did not want to teach Kurt Bishop that he'd misjudged a VIP. She wanted to see, and some analytical, watchful part of her wanted the lobby's cameras to see, exactly how far he would take it against a woman he was completely certain was nobody. Because that was the true measure of Kurt Bishop, and of the beautiful campus with her name on the front of it, and of whether the things she said in every all hands had survived the trip out to the turnstile. If you have ever had to stand there and prove you belong somewhere your own work had built, you already know the exact weight of that turnstile. So, if this is landing, take a second and hit that like button. It genuinely helps carry this story to the next person who's lived it. And stay with me, because our chief of staff is about to come off the elevator, and Kurt Bishop's morning is about to end. The younger guard on that shift was named Malik, and he is not a minor part of this. Malik was 26, 3 months into the security job, his first steady job with benefits, the one that let him move out of his mother's place, and he was black, and in 3 months he had learned exactly what it was like to work under Kurt Bishop. Watch the ones who don't look like they belong, trust your gut. Kurt had said it to him a dozen times, warmly, as though passing down a craft, and Malik had understood very quickly what Kurt's gut was tuned to, because he had been on the receiving end of that kind of gut his whole life, and had even caught Kurt watching him a beat too long his own first week, before the uniform made him legible. He had kept his head down because he needed the job, and because keeping your head down was the whole unspoken curriculum of surviving a man like Kurt. This job was not a small thing to Malik. It was the first steady work with benefits he had ever had. It was the reason he had been able to move out of his mother's apartment and start night classes toward a degree in information security. It had a probationary period he was still inside of, which meant Kurt, the senior man on the shift, held a real piece of Malik's whole future in the offhand way a senior man holds a junior's fate. Malik had done the arithmetic 100 times in 3 months, and it always came out the same. Keep quiet, keep the shifts, keep the plan alive. Which is exactly why what he did that morning, pulling out his phone, going over his own supervisor's head while that supervisor stood 10 feet away, was not the small reflex it might look like from the outside. He was spending the job, the probation, the whole fragile plan, on the chance that doing the right thing this once would not quietly end all of it. But this was different, and Malik could feel it. The woman wasn't flustered. She was calm in a way that made Kurt's certainty look, for the first time, like a man who had badly misjudged the room. And there was something about her face that Malik had seen recently and couldn't quite place, until his eyes drifted over Kurt's shoulder to the slow rotation on the lobby welcome screen and landed on the founder's photo, and his stomach dropped straight through the floor. "Kurt," he said, stepping closer, his voice tight. "Kurt, man, look at the screen. Look at the welcome screen behind you." "Not now, Malik." Kurt didn't take his eyes off Nia. "Go stand by the doors." And Malik stood at the exact fork in the road that fear builds for people who need their jobs. Obey the senior man who controlled his shifts and his probation, or do the thing he knew was right and find out what it cost. 3 months in, on a job that had just changed his whole life, it was not a small fork. He looked at the woman. He looked at the photo glowing on the wall, the same face, unmistakable now. And instead of arguing with a man who would not turn around, he did the one thing he could do that Kurt couldn't override. He pulled out his phone and sent a fast message to the front office and the executive floor. The CEO is at the main turnstile, and Kurt is detaining her. Someone needs to come down now. It was the bravest thing Malik had done in 3 months, and it did not feel brave. It felt like his hands going cold while he typed something his fear had spent 3 months training him not to do. By now, a couple of early employees had stopped pretending to badge through the other turnstiles and openly begun to record, because the scene had crossed a line they could feel before they could name it. A guard squaring up on a calm woman who'd only forgotten her badge. The charge in the lobby had shifted, the way it always does, from a guard doing his job into a room watching a guard do something ugly to a person who would not stop being reasonable about it. Kurt felt the eyes and mistook the discomfort for the tension of enforcement, when it was really a dozen employees slowly realizing they were watching the wrong side of something. One of them said so, out loud, to Kurt's back. An engineer waiting at the next turnstile, a man Kurt cleared through every single day, turned and said, plainly, "She offered to show you her phone. She offered to have you call upstairs. I've watched the whole thing. Why won't you just check?" Kurt, flustered, said something about protocol and unverified access, and the engineer looked at him with open disbelief and kept his own phone up, recording, because he had already understood the shape of what he was seeing before anyone said the founder's name. It changed nothing about Kurt's course. He had planted his flag in front of a growing crowd and could not now retreat from it. But it told Nia something, and it told the lobby something, about whose presence Kurt waved through without a glance, and whose he treated as a threat every morning without once noticing he was doing it. The woman who came off the elevator at a near run was Priya Anand, the CEO's chief of staff, and she had worked at Nia Coleman's side for 6 years, had been in 10,000 meetings with her, traveled the world with her, knew her face better than she knew her own family's. Priya had joined the company when it was 90 people in a leaking building, precisely because of the door speech. She had been an overqualified operations manager, passed over one too many times somewhere else. And Nia had looked at her resume and seen not the gaps other people flagged, but the pattern behind them, and had hired her in an afternoon. 6 years later, Priya ran the CEO's entire orbit, and she had watched, up close, the specific tax Nia paid that her white peers did not. The meetings where Nia had to establish again that she was the founder. The events where security drifted a little closer to her than to anyone else. The reporters who opened by asking who really handled the technical side. Priya had seen it 100 times, and it had never once stopped surprising her how calmly Nia absorbed it. So, when the message came that the CEO was being detained at her own turnstile, Priya did not just move fast out of loyalty. She moved fast out of fury, a 6-year accumulation of watching the best person she knew be treated over and over as the least likely one in the room. She had been upstairs on 12, glancing at her watch, wondering where Nia was, when Malik's message and a call from the front office reached her in the same instant. She was moving before she had finished reading. She came around the corner into the lobby and saw it. A security guard squared up at the main turnstile, hand on his radio, blocking a woman in a gray hoodie. And the woman was the founder and CEO of the company, standing beneath her own name in lit steel letters. "Kurt!" Priya's voice cracked across the lobby. "Kurt, stop! Back away from her, right now." "Ms. Anand," Kurt turned, and his shoulders loosened with relief, because in his mind, management had come to back him up. "I've got a tailgater at the turnstile. No badge, heading for the executive floors. I'm handling. That is Dr. Nia Coleman." Each word was its own sentence, laid down flat. "That is the founder of this company. That is the CEO. That is her name on the wall directly above your head. That is her face on the welcome screen you sit under all day. You have spent the last 10 minutes detaining and threatening to call the police on the woman who owns the building you are standing in." The color went out of Kurt Bishop's face the way water leaves a sink when the plug is pulled. And across the lobby, the young guard named Malik felt something come loose in his chest that he hadn't known was clenched tight. Because he had spent 3 months being told, in 100 small ways, that Kurt's picture of who belonged was right, and his own doubts were something to swallow. And here, in front of everyone, in the space of 2 sentences, the 2 pictures had traded places. The name went through the lobby like a current. You could watch it move. The early employees who had gathered without meaning to, the ones filming, the ones just off the elevators with their coffees, every one of them hearing Coleman and turning, almost in unison, to look from the woman in the gray hoodie to the lit steel letters over the reception desk and back again. A low sound moved through the crowd, not quite words, the collective intake of breath of people understanding all at once exactly what they had been watching, and, worse, what they had very nearly stood by and let happen. The phones that had been half lowered came back up, steady now, with purpose. Somewhere near the back, someone said, softly, "Oh my God, that's her." And Kurt Bishop stood in the middle of all of it, the one person in the lobby who could not make the pieces fit, feeling the floor of 4 years of certainty go out from under him, while 100 eyes did the arithmetic he still couldn't. If you have ever waited for the moment the truth finally arrives in a room that refused to see it, take 1 second and leave a like, it genuinely carries this story to the next person who's been the one nobody believed. And stay with me, because Kurt Bishop is about to reach for the oldest excuse there is, and Nia Coleman is going to answer it with something far heavier than anger. For a moment, Kurt simply could not take it in. His eyes went up, actually up, to the lit steel letters on the wall he had sat beneath for 4 years, and then to the welcome screen where the founder's photograph glowed on its slow rotation, and then back to the woman in the hoodie at his turnstile, and the 3 of them resolved into one, and 4 years of certainty collapsed under him all at once. "Dr. Coleman," he managed. "Ma'am, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I didn't recognize you. You didn't have a badge. You weren't. I wasn't dressed like a CEO." Nia finished the sentence for him, quietly, and the quiet of it was heavier than any shout. "I know. I have heard some version of that my whole career, in server rooms, in pitch meetings, in this very lobby where people have assumed I was the assistant walking in behind the boss. But I want to be precise with you because that isn't actually what went wrong here. It doesn't matter that you failed to recognize the founder. What matters is that you looked at a black woman in a hoodie and decided, before I said one word, that I'd snuck in, that the likeliest explanation for me was theft. You'd have done that to any woman who looked like me, to half the engineers who build the thing this company sells, that my name happens to be on the wall over your head is the least important thing about this morning. It's just the only part that's going to cost you. Ms. Coleman, please, Kurt's voice had climbed. 4 years I've kept this building safe. No badge, heading for the secure floors. I have protocols. You didn't follow a protocol. Nia's voice never rose. Your protocol is to verify. You did the opposite of your protocol. I offered you 3 ways to verify me, and you refused all 3, because verifying might have proven you wrong, and being right about me had become more important to you than being correct. Her eyes moved to Malik, just for a second, and back. I don't think this was the first time you decided someone didn't belong here on site. I think it's the first time you were wrong about a woman whose name was on the door. Then she did the thing that separated this from a story about revenge. She turned to Priya and said evenly, I want the lobby footage from this morning preserved, all of it. And I don't want anyone leaning on the young guard, Malik. He recognized me, and when Kurt wouldn't listen, he flagged it up the chain, knowing exactly what it might cost him. I want that recorded exactly as it happened, and I want it to help him, not hurt him. She had built the whole company on the idea that a system is only as fair as its record, and she knew, better than anyone standing in that lobby, how these mornings usually ended when there was no footage. 2 versions of events, a guard's and a stranger's, and a quiet institutional consensus that the guard was probably right, and the stranger probably difficult. She was not preserving the cameras out of vengeance. She was preserving them because a documented wrong can be answered, and an undocumented one simply becomes your word against theirs. And Nia Coleman had spent a whole career being the one whose word came second. And then, once Priya had it in hand and Kurt had gone gray, and the lobby had rearranged itself around the truth, Nia did the small, quiet thing she had actually come in early to do. She rode the elevator up to 12, alone, and walked the unfinished floor in the gray morning light, bare concrete and taped-out rooms and cabling not yet hidden in the walls, and she stood in the middle of the empty space and let herself feel what it wanted to become, the way she always did. It was the reason she had come before dawn. A manager at a turnstile had tried to make the morning about whether she belonged in her own building, and Nia had declined, in the end, to let him. She finished her errand. She walked her floor. She stood in the quiet of a space that would soon be full of people she'd hired precisely because the world had once waved them off. And she thought about what they would build there, and the man downstairs and his certainty simply ceased for those few minutes to exist. That, more than the firing that was coming, was her real answer. She had come to walk the 12th floor. She walked it. Kurt Bishop did not keep his job, and the way it ended was quiet, which is worse than loud. There was a meeting a couple of days later, and the lobby footage played on a screen without commentary while a few people watched it. Nia, Priya, someone from the company's legal and HR side. They let it run. Kurt watched himself come around the desk. He watched himself block a turnstile and refuse, 3 times over, to spend 30 seconds verifying a woman who kept, evenly, offering him the means to do it, while he reached instead for the radio and the word police. When it was over, he began to talk about the 4 years, about the protocols, about the impossible position, about how any vigilant guard might have made the same call. And Nia said the only thing she said in that meeting. You keep telling us what you saw. Nobody in this room is arguing about what you saw. We're telling you that what you saw was the problem. There was nothing to answer that with, because it was exactly true, and some part of Kurt, perhaps for the first time, understood it. He was separated from the company that week, not, the written record was careful to state, for the embarrassment of having stopped the CEO, but for what the footage plainly showed he would have done to anyone who looked like her and lacked her leverage. And the rest of the guard staff understood the message without anyone having to spell it out. It was not that they would be fired for a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes on a shift. It was that the thing Kurt had done, deciding on site, refusing to check, reaching for the police over the directory, was no longer going to be quietly tolerated as a style of doing the job, the way it had been tolerated in him for 4 years. Several of the older guards, if they were honest with themselves in the days after, recognized pieces of their own habits in that footage and adjusted them quietly without ever being told to. That is often how the real change moves through a place after a story like this, not in the firing, which everyone talks about, but in the 100 small private corrections nobody ever announces. The footage did what footage does now. An employee had caught most of it, and within days a clip of a corporate security guard detaining a black woman in her own company's lobby, beneath her own name in steel letters, beside her own face on the welcome screen, had traveled far past the campus. The company, whose entire public brand was about widening the door, had the uniquely mortifying problem of having been caught on its own cameras slamming that door on its own founder, and it moved quickly to make clear the man at the turnstile did not represent it. Kurt would not work corporate security at that level again. That is a real and heavy consequence, and I won't pretend it isn't. But Nia did more than remove one guard, and this is the part that mattered to her. One name surfaced when she ordered a review of security's practices across every one of the company's sites, and she could not let it go. The engineer from the data team, the young black woman who had been stopped 3 times in a month and had quietly left, her exit interview blaming only culture. Nia read it, and then she did a thing CEOs rarely do. She reached out to the woman personally, apologized for what the company had let happen to her, and asked whether she'd ever consider coming back on her own terms. The woman was wary. She had earned the wariness. But she came in for a conversation, and what she told Nia about those months went straight, unsoftened into the new training. The change Nia built across the company was less satisfying than a viral clip, and mattered a great deal more. She had every site security operation retrained around a single inverted rule. The burden is on the guard to verify, never on the person to prove, and no one is detained or accused until the 30-second check has actually been run. Because the whole trick of the quiet kind of profiling is that it skips the check precisely when the check might prove it wrong. She built a protected reporting line so the Maliks of the company could flag a Kurt without staking their probation on it. And she tied a piece of every site manager's review to a number nobody in corporate security had ever bothered to track. Not just incidents stopped, but people wrongly stopped. Because, as she told her operations chief, you measure what you actually care about. And if we only count the intrusions we prevent and never count the employees we humiliate, we will keep building a company that is safe for the machines and hostile to half the people who run them. Fixing the guard was removing a broken part. Going back for the person the broken part had already driven out. That, Nia told Priya, was the actual repair. And here is the uncomfortable part, because the story is a lie if I skip it. Kurt Bishop got caught because he happened to aim his certainty at the one woman who owned the building. Strip that accident away, and what's left is a guard who was, by the company's old conventional measures, doing his job for 4 years, where doing his job quietly included deciding who looked like they belonged and treating everyone else as a threat, and being thanked for a few of the catches. For every Kurt who detains the founder and detonates his career on camera, there are 100 still working 100 lobbies and gates, running the smaller, safer version on people who own nothing and can summon no one, and going home certain they kept the building safe. The camera found this one. The only question the story really leaves you with is how many it never finds. Now, let me tell you what happened to everyone else, because one firing is not the same thing as justice, and the two need to be counted separately. Malik did not lose his job. He got a much better one. Nia Coleman does not forget the person who does the right thing when it is costly, and a 26-year-old trainee who tried to make his own supervisor look at the truth, and then flagged it up the chain when he wouldn't, 3 months into the job that had just changed his whole life, was precisely that person. Nia found him later that day. She didn't make a production of it. She just said, "You told your own boss to look at the truth when it would have been easier to back him up. And when he wouldn't, you flagged it, knowing what he could do to your probation. Do you understand how rare that is?" Malik started to say it was nothing, that anyone would have, and Nia stopped him gently, the way a woman who spent a career being underestimated learns to stop that sentence in someone else. "It was the whole thing," she said. "Everyone else in that lobby found a reason to look at their phones. You were the only one who moved while it still cost you something. Don't ever let anyone tell you it was small." She learned he was taking night classes toward a degree in information security, that the guard job was the first rung of a ladder, not the whole of his ambition. And she moved him off Kurt's crew onto a track with real advancement and mentored quietly by people who valued exactly the instinct Kurt had tried to train out of him. Within a couple of years, Malik was on the company's actual security engineering team, protecting the building with code instead of a clipboard. He kept, taped inside his desk drawer where only he could see it, a line he'd written to himself the week he transferred. "Check first." Not the badge, the assumption. Run your own assumption before you run anyone's credentials. He thought of the woman in the gray hoodie every time a new hire came through the lobby, braced for a no. Every time a system he built had to decide whether to trust someone or stop them, and he made very sure the systems he touched defaulted to the 30-second check, and never to the hand on the radio. He would never know exactly how many people that spared, the ones who walked in and simply got to their desks, never learning they had needed sparing. That was the point. The people you protect by getting it right are, by definition, the ones who never find out they were at risk. Malik had learned that from watching a founder refuse to flash her title, and he built it quietly into the bones of a company, which is a thing a frightened trainee, 3 months in, had no way of imagining he would ever get to do. The morning he pulled out his phone and went over his own boss's head. And Nia used the morning the way she used every bug in a system. She found the root cause. She ordered a review of security practices across every one of the company's sites, changed the training, and built a protected way for the Maliks of the company to report exactly this without gambling their jobs on it. The new first rule, the one she insisted go at the top of the guard training, was the plainest thing imaginable and the one Kurt had skipped. You verify before you accuse. Everyone gets the 30 seconds. None of it made a headline. All of it changed, month over month, who felt they could walk into their own workplace without bracing. That, and not one man's firing, was the thing she had come in early to protect. There is one last picture I want to leave you with from some months later. A new engineer, a young black woman, first week on the job, badge not yet activated in the system, came through the lobby early, nervous, braced out of long habit for exactly the kind of morning Nia had once had at that turnstile. And the guard on duty checked the directory, found her, smiled, and walked her to the elevator himself, telling her the 12th floor had the best coffee and not to let anyone tell her otherwise. That guard was Malik before his transfer to the engineering team, holding a door open, wide, for a young woman who would never know how much it had once cost at that exact turnstile to be led up to her own desk. The young engineer thanked him and rode up to 12 and got to work, and never once had to wonder whether she belonged in the building, which is the whole of what everyone in this story was ever actually fighting over, and the quietest, most complete kind of victory there is. A morning in which nothing happened to her at all. That is what changed. Not that one guard was fired, that the door opened. Nia thought afterward that the whole company came down to that one word she used in every all-hands, the door. She had spent a childhood on the wrong side of doors, an hour of library computer time a day because it was all the access she had. She had spent a career being made to prove, over and over, that she belonged on the other side of doors other people walked through without a thought. So she had built a company whose entire purpose, underneath the software and the valuation, was to widen the door, to make sure the person who did not look the part got the 30 seconds and the benefit of the doubt instead of a hand on a radio. And on one gray morning, at her own turnstile, she had watched the door she had spent her life widening try to slam shut on her, operated by a man who sincerely believed he was doing his job. It was the sharpest possible reminder that a value written on a wall is not the same as a value practiced at a desk, and that the distance between the two is exactly where people like her get stopped. She spent the rest of her time as CEO closing that distance, one protocol and one Moloch at a time. Let me leave you with the thing underneath all of it. Kurt Bishop looked at a woman and saw an intruder because she was black and in a hoodie and walking toward a floor he'd decided wasn't for her. And she founded the company. Her name was in lit letters over his head and on the front of the building. That is the irony, and it is a clean one, and it is why the story travels. But the irony is not the point, and I don't want you to leave thinking it is. The point is, the thing Nia said, standing under her own name, that the real victim is not the founder who can summon a chief of staff, but the ordinary early shift engineer. The same instinct would have marched out of her own workplace with no one to call, the one who just forgot her badge, who only wanted to get to her desk, and who would have gone home doubting whether she belonged there at all. A world where you have to own the building to be allowed past the turnstile has fixed nothing at all. It has only, once in a great while, by pure accident, aimed its suspicion at someone whose name was on the wall. So, let me ask you what I always ask, because your answers are the best part of doing this. Have you ever had to prove you belong somewhere your own work had helped build, stopped, doubted, told you couldn't possibly be who you said you were, for no reason you could name but the obvious one? And what did you make of how Nia handled it? The calm, the 3 offered ways to check, the saved footage, the choice to fix the whole company instead of just savoring one man's bad morning. Would you have kept that composure? I'm honestly not sure I could. Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. And if this story moved you, do the small things that carry it to the next person. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're not already here, and share it with someone who needs the reminder that belonging was never supposed to require a badge. Thank you truly for spending this time with me. Take care of each other, and I'll see you in the next one.